of Hugh McDermott and Thomas Telfer, and I think we could probably make more of those particular local heroes in terms of attracting people.
Reading history? Any interest there? Reading history?
Yes, I know that's a big interest of yours, Fiona, and I've watched your films on it, and yeah, I think that's obviously potential as well. But I think that's like the idea of Langholm First coming together, the community coming together to sort of set their priorities. Is a good way forward, because as I said earlier, you do need a destination and you need to sort of focus on a draw that will get people here.
Joan, I know you were waiting to get in on the tourism.
No, I just wanted to check with Douglas if his tourism tax was with the money would be ring fenced to remain locally.
Yeah, it would be.
And it would be ring fenced. It would go to the local communities.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
So, I mean, tourism massively underexploited in the south of Scotland. Obviously, lots of people they come up and think about the countryside of Scotland and they tend to shoot right through the southern part of Scotland and go head right to the Highlands. So, and they don't realise just the absolute beauty around these parts. I live in the Tweed Valley, and at this time of year, it's honestly one of the most beautiful places, not just in Scotland, but really in Europe. Completely underexploited when it comes to tourism. Now, as to what an MP can do, Douglas or I, if we were MPs, we're not going to be sitting in the House of Commons trying to argue to get a law through to open a new hotel in a particular town. You have to work on committees and work to get investment and set up things like a Borders Redevelopment Fund or whatever, and do these sorts of things. But there is an enormous lot of untapped potential that's there. And if I think about places that have been in Europe, Umbria and Italy, for instance, you go there and there's thousands of tourists walking around, going on led routes between little towns, staying in the hotels, eating in all the restaurants. All these companies should be in business here as well, doing these sorts of things in places like this, and they're just not. So yes, completely underexploited. You can't have a detailed 100-point plan on this, but you have to have an MP obviously that's completely across these issues.
David, completely underexploited?
Absolutely. When I was a member of the Scottish Parliament, Joan's colleague Alec Neil was chairman of the Tourism Committee, and that committee, which I was a member of, did what I thought was an excellent report on tourism in Scotland, and it had two significant recommendations in it which were never followed through on. One was that tourism decision-making strategy needed to be led by tourism businesses, the people who were actually dealing with the issues on a day-to-day basis. And secondly, that there had to be more local decision-making. And I think this area has been prejudiced by the changes that have taken place in relation to Visit Scotland, so that there isn't a local board, as a Dumfries and Galloway Visit Scotland Tourist Board, as previously was, that could focus on the specific needs and opportunities here. One of the opportunities in this area is, for example, people coming from the north of England, that people who can, within a couple of hours, there is a huge market to bring people from the north of England, but we don't have focused marketing of Dumfries and Galloway or the Scottish borders into that area anymore. We have the wider Visit Scotland effort. Now, I'm not wholly critical of Visit Scotland. They bring people to Scotland, and Joan's right, Edinburgh is growing exponentially in terms of tourists, but those people are not spreading out over the south of Scotland, and we need to do more in terms of having that more locally focused tourist support to make that happen. And that, along with what can be done here locally in terms of packaging the product in a modern, professional way.
But I'm sorry, David is talking about ancient history in the Scottish Parliament here. Alec Neil was convener of whatever and so on. But actually, what we have to say is, quite simply, what has happened in the last 12 years, David? What's the point, is it not?
Well, I'm just saying that I think the Scottish Parliament has not taken forward those recommendations, and that they should have. That's what I'm saying.
Let us move on to housing, another issue. There's a question here. How are you intending to improve and meet housing requirements for the Langholm area? I mean, for a start, do you think it's adequate? Joan, you kick us off on that one. Is it adequate? Have we got enough housing? Do we need more?
Well, I know that the community is divided on that. When I speak to people, you know, there is an argument that we need the kind of housing that young families want to live in. And as has been said earlier, that young families would want to live here and commute elsewhere. The Scottish Government has a commitment to build 50,000 new homes over the course of this Parliament, and we're going to be delivering that. It's a very ambitious commitment. It's housing is something that's devolved, obviously.
And do we know how many of those houses are coming to Dumfriesshire, to this area?
It's a local authority that then come to the government, and the local authorities tell the government where the need is, and they put forward a housing plan, and then they can bid for the money. Now, there are people who say to me, well, we can't sell the houses in Langholm at the moment. There are others that say we need more housing. There is an issue around land in Langholm and getting access to land for new housing. And so if new housing is needed, we need to sit down and have a conversation as a community about how that land is going to be accessed.
And this is because the land is owned by a landowner, presumably?
I believe so, yes. Yeah, there isn't. So if there is a need, and if a need for new housing is identified in Langholm, then the conversation would have to happen about the land for that housing.
David, your view on housing in Langholm?
Well, housing is a fundamental part of the plan and determining what sort of community people want Langholm to be. And John knows, for example, you know, that there is an equivalent argument in Peebles. How big should that community be? What size do people think it should be? How is it sustainable? We need in Langholm to come to a common view as to what we see, you know, as the size of the community, of the type of housing that's here, and then that needs to be fed into the local plan with the local authority, because if the local authority are not on side and not agreeing that, then it doesn't get through the hoops. And if the community is not agreeing it and people are opposing and challenging the local plan, nothing will happen. I personally am favourable to additional housing in Langholm. I think that we have to seek to attract younger people with families to Langholm so that Langholm can remain a diverse, sustainable community. And those people are most likely to be people who currently work somewhere in the area, most likely within Carlisle. And I am favourable to promoting Langholm as a place from which people would commute to Carlisle, because I think that will assist the local economy.
Douglas, housing, as you see it, very different from housing in London. You're a councillor in London.
Yeah. Well, housing in London there's a great pressure on housing. I have people coming to my surgeries all the time, mothers always with children, maybe as many as 4, who are living in a one-bedroom house. But the point about that is there's not enough council housing. And the point about Langholm is, that no one else on the panel has said thus far, is that we lost quite a lot of good council housing in Langholm at Tanfoot. The Conservative councillor helped to get rid of that, so it has not been replaced, and it's known locally as the Hole. And it's been there for years, and nothing has been done about it, I'm afraid. And again, I come back to this point, whilst David has been the MP, it's not his sole responsibility, obviously, nothing has been done about it. But if I was able myself to fill in the hole, I would.
I could give people that absolute commitment, but it is not within the bailiwick of any MP whoever is elected on the 8th of June to be able to give a commitment to fill in that hole.
David, I'll give that commitment if you come with me, and I know there are people here tonight who would help us. But listen, on housing, Labour in its manifesto, just very quickly, Labour in its manifesto have committed in Scotland to build 60,000 new homes over the course of the Parliament. Across the UK, we're committed to build 1 million new homes. 500,000 of those will be council homes. These are commitments that will transform Britain. And while we're at it, we have made a firm commitment in our manifesto to make land ownership more transparent, so you know exactly who owns the land round here, because it stinks. The Duke of Buccleuch owns the whole lot, and it's not to stop.
Well, the Duke of Buccleuch is not here to defend himself, so let me bring you in, John, here, please.
So, in a similar way to Labour, the Liberal Democrats at the UK level have a commitment to build 300,000 homes per year over the course of the next parliamentary term, but obviously housing is devolved in Scotland. I think there's a slight issue of possibly putting the cart before the horse here. If there's a hustling, bustling economy, local economy here, then there will be demand for housing, and that will have to be met. So you have to actually get the economy working, rather than just saying let's build a bunch of houses. So I think we slightly keep coming back to some of the things that we're going back to before, but actually getting the local economy functioning properly.
But I do think this is important. It's the crux of the matter, isn't it? You know, we keep going back to the economy, don't we, and employment and the high street. I have to say, having filmed in various parts of the whole of the south of Scotland, I think the high street in Langholm is not bad, you know, and it's really on the up.
But Fiona used to be a lot better, you know.
But you know, and these shops are coming back. I'm really quite buoyed by what I see there, but I know it could be better. But you know, I just want to put in a bit of praise for the high street and for all those those people who set up businesses there, because I think you're doing a cracking job under severe circumstances.
Just on that point, one of them said to me last week that this person, I won't give the gender of this person, it's not doing that well because someone had used a food bank that has the business, had used a food bank that has a business on the high street in Langholm. Now, that's absolutely appalling, isn't it, in Langholm? It's appalling in Scotland, it's appalling anywhere. And I make a very political point, very deliberately. David Mundell opened a food bank in Dumfries, and he should be ashamed of that, I'm afraid.
What I think Douglas, that Labour should be ashamed of was when Labour were in government, they didn't allow the Department of Work and Pensions, didn't allow job centres to make any mention or direct people to food banks or make people aware of food banks. Food banks existed then. There have always been people in crisis, there will always be people in crisis, and food banks properly set up allow people to move on from that point of crisis in their lives. So I don't think it's great, and I'm not pleased that there are food banks. But I recognise the reality that there are food banks in every developed country in the world. And what food banks are able to offer is people a way out of the crisis that they find themselves in their lives. And in the past, food banks, the equivalent has been provided within communities, within churches and other organisations, because throughout time, people have always found themselves at a point of crisis.
Now you ask yourselves, is that the kind of country you want to live in?
Douglas, I think there were food banks when Labour was in power as well.
Not many.
Well, we're very clear on that. We stand firmly on an anti-austerity platform. I'll tell you something, there won't be any food banks after the 8th of June. We'll get rid of them and be
So make one point here. Douglas talks about the Labour Party being the anti-austerity party of this general election. The Conservative Party at the moment is due to put through £9 billion worth of welfare cuts during the next Parliament. The Institute for Fiscal Studies have looked at both the Liberal Democrat manifesto and the Labour manifesto and worked through the numbers on our tax and welfare proposals, and they have concluded that Labour will reverse £2 billion of those £9 billion of cuts in the coming Parliament. They have also concluded that the Liberal Democrats would reverse with their plans on tax and welfare all £9 billion worth of cuts. So I'm afraid you won't get rid of food banks, but the Liberal Democrats probably would, or at least do have a far better chance of doing that than Labour. You should be the party of austerity, but unfortunately your numbers don't add up.
So the Liberal Democrats are telling us we're not left-wing enough. That's a new one. That's a new one. But actually, our manifesto commitments are totally cost-based. I don't know if the Lib Dems are actually, but one thing we know is there are no costings in the Conservative manifesto, none at all. That's pretty damning for the party of government.
David.
Theresa May has made it clear that the Conservative manifesto is financially neutral in terms of the additional commitments and in terms.
What does that mean, financially neutral?
Well, it means that there is no additional spending, where there are new areas of spending, that spending is met in terms of reductions elsewhere, and we've been very clear about that.
Let's go on to